Mijas Spain, June 2010. A trigger-happy contract killer from Dublin, Eric "Lucky" Wilson, clashes with an Essex hardman, Tall Dan Smith, on the run from England for the brutal shooting of a millionaire businessman. But what brought these volatile individuals together, leaving one dead and the other locked up for 23 years? In this episode, we'll give a background of both men from Dublin and Essex and finish the video with a detailed account of the vicious confrontation and the horrific outcome that would bring the downfall of both men. Eric "Lucky" Wilson is part of a family who Stephen Breen in the book The Hitman alleges are Ireland's first family of contract killers. Brothers John, Eric, Keith and their nephew Luke grew up in Ballyfermot, Dublin, while their cousin Alan was raised in the South Inner City. Though John was the oldest, Eric was the first to allegedly become involved in murder when the book claims he shot his former best friend Martin Kenny in 2005 in a dispute over missing drugs. Eric then allegedly went out to carry out hits in Drogheda, the north and Spain before the confrontation with English criminal Tall Dan Smith in a coked-up rage at a Costa del Sol bar in June 2010. Tall Dan Smith was well liked by friends and family, but also had a reputation as one of the next generations of hardmen to emerge from Essex Badlands. Those close to him will dispute this, but studying the court records and victim statements, it would be fair to say he saw himself as a man not to be crossed. Why he decided to involve himself in a dispute involving millionaire businessman Doug Turner's family, only he will know, but this was the moment he embarked on a sinister path that would end in tragedy. During a hearing at Chelmsford Crown Court in October 2008, it was revealed the shooting in July 2007 was a revenge attack. A judge heard how the day before, a friend of Jason Steele was beaten up at the Crown pub Billericay by Mr. Turner's son, John, and his pal Patrick Flanagan. An enraged Steele found out the pair were responsible, and it was claimed in court decided to take revenge with his pal Dan Smith and Wayne Perry. The trio drove to the Turners' home, where John Turner, his parents Douglas and Linda, and Patrick Flanagan were inside. Barrister John Caudle, prosecuting at the time, told the court Mr. Turner went outside to speak to the three men. It was then said that Smith pulled out the double-barrel shotgun. He tried to shoot Mr. Turner, but the gun failed to go off. He reloaded the gun as Mr. Turner fled and fired twice. The shot struck Douglas Turner, blowing off 3 of his fingers and injured him in the arm and stomach. Dan went on the run immediately, spending time in Cyprus and Portugal before settling in Spain. Steele and Perry pled guilty to assisting Smith to leave the country and got 9 months each. It's surprising the prosecution did not go for joint enterprise, which was not outlawed until 2016. If the police had alleged Perry and Steele knew Smith was carrying the gun, it would have been a relatively easy conviction. Dan's family disputed his role in the incident. His mum claimed he was set up by the other 2 older men in his absence. They were in their 40s and Dan was in his early 20s. She claims he never got out of the van and it was the 2 older men who committed the shooting, but the police were convinced it was a 6'5" Dan Smith. Going on the run is far from easy and very stressful, but according to all reports, Smith finally settled in Mijas, working as a roofer, and had no issues with police or extradition. It seemed that his family also went to live in Spain, in a village nearby, according to the expat newspaper Olive Press in Spain. The original reason British criminals went to the Costa was the collapse in 1978 of a long-standing extradition agreement. That opened the Costas for villains in the UK to top up their tans while out of reach of the law. Up to 100 major villains settled in Spain, mainly across the coast of the Sun, Costa del Sol. Bars with names like Sinatra's and El Bandito catered to the new arrivals, and the stretch of coast became a European Miami, sunny, decadent, and definitely dangerous. It was a good place to hide, with 100,000 or so Brits making a first or second home there. The night of the horrific burst of violence would take place Saturday 10th of June 2010 at the Lounge Bar in Mijas, a popular venue with expats that showed Premiership football and will be a go-to place on a Saturday to enjoy a few beers and watch the footy. Eric Wilson had allegedly had arguments previously in the Lounge Bar, but was friendly with the owner, Steve Reynolds, who let him leave his rucksack when driving over on his motorbike from his remote farmhouse 20 miles plus away. He would come and go and had been a frequent visitor for over a year, with locals saying he was on the most part pleasant. This fateful Saturday, the football had been on in the evening, and there was a blow-up over Wilson being in the way of the TV. Someone had called him a thick paddy, and he had kicked off threatening all sorts. A patron in the bar went outside and calmed Wilson down, and he came back in and apologised for his overreaction. This was not to be the end of his explosive temper getting the better of him, and is why there was speculation he'd been sniffing white powder during the day, adding to his paranoia. Contrary to reports in the media claiming what happened next was a contract killing, it was actually a row over Eric Wilson being accused of touching Dan Smith's girlfriend's leg. Georgia, Smith's girlfriend, claims the Dubliner Wilson groped her leg and a row broke out. Two volatile hardmen enclosed in a small bar arguing over a woman was always going to spell problems. Wilson and Smith squared up, with Wilson pushing the much taller Smith off him and retreating outside, swearing he would come back seeking revenge for the Essex man humiliating him. He knew he would stand little chance with Smith in a fistfight, and crazily decided to go off on his bike to pick a 9mm pistol up as a leveller. It still amazes me how things can blow up to deadly levels over such trivial matters. It was seen the two men were not friends, but were known to each other, and Dan warned everyone to stay in the bar, as he was expecting him to come back and make good on his threats. The following events does seem to paint tall Dan Smith as being a little naive and not a seasoned criminal. Someone who was experienced in violent situations surely would have been more vigilant and either left the bar or armed themselves. Smith, however, was nonchalantly sitting outside the bar, enjoying the summer evening with his drink, when the next thing anyone knew was bang, bang, bang. Customers outside on the terrace ran for their lives as the towering Daniel Smith keeled over after being shot to death in front of their eyes by a lone gunman. As with all these terrible cases, it's the families that suffer most, and no matter the past crimes of Smith, he didn't deserve to die in such brutal circumstances. His girlfriend told the Olive Press after the terrible ordeal, "This guy came back, drove round the corner, and then sneaked up a back alley. When Dan wasn't looking, he walked right up behind him and shot him in the head. It was horrific." The Spanish police acted quickly, and Irishman Wilson was tracked down to a farmhouse in Coyne, some half an hour away, and they found fake passports, explosives, and his motorbike. The murder weapon was never found. Eric Wilson was remanded in custody, and in the court case, the only significant evidence against him was one of a star witness whose identity was protected. There was no other witnesses who said they saw the incident. Wilson was found guilty, with the foreman of the jury saying, "We find the defendant killed the victim in a pre-planned fashion and using extreme violence. He had the time to pre-plan the murder and acted in an inhumane way that increased the victim's suffering." Wilson's defence lawyer, Javier Mora, said outside court, "The key to all of this was the protected witness who gave evidence against my client. He was the sole witness to stand up in court and identify him as the killer. We will appeal as soon as the judge determines sentence." Wilson was given a 23-year sentence, and in 2013 was denied an appeal hearing. The popular Essex boy, Dan Smith, had around 200 friends meet up in a bar in Spain to mourn the tragic murder of him. It seemed no one had a bad word to say about Tall Dan, apart from the Turner family back home in Essex. It is indeed another case of murderous fate that a perpetrator of gun violence ended up losing his life to it. There are never any winners over the long term when it comes to crime and violence, but sadly many lose their lives before coming to realise that brutal truth.